There's a phrase in behavioral research, pre-mediated development. It means your core beliefs formed before any external architecture could sequence what you saw first. Gen X is the largest living cohort that overall fits that definition. And in the research that was actively running while they were in grade school, they already flagged this generation as a problem. Your beliefs didn't form, they were installed before age 7. Let's establish what we're actually talking about before we get into what was built during it. Cognitive psychology has documented this for decades. The beliefs that form before age 7 about authority, about institutions, about who you're allowed to trust, they don't get reasoned within adulthood. They get defended. The prefrontal cortex isn't developed enough before that age to critically evaluate source. So whatever gets in early gets in without a filter. Parents, be careful with kids, especially nowadays. Gen X was born between 1965 and 1980. The oldest of them hit 7 in 1972. The youngest hit 7 in 1987. There was no algorithm in that window, no recommendation engine, no platform sequencing what they feared first. Their primary input was boredom, solitude, own unstructured thoughts. That is an unmediated development environment, and that is increasingly rare today. What I want to walk through right now is what was being actively constructed during the exact window and why the generation that grew up before it matters to understanding what came after it. Most people think about media manipulation as something that started with the internet. It didn't. In 1928, 25 years before the classified programs formally began, a man named Edward Bernays published a book called Propaganda. First line: the conscious and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. This wasn't a warning, it was a pitch deck. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew. His first clients included the US government. The techniques he built, authority transfer, manufactured consensus, fear activation, were World War I psychological operations, repackaged for peacetime civilian use. And if you've done any studying into marketing or even noticed some things about marketing, you see this playing out day after day. This matters because it tells you the intent predates the infrastructure. The classified programs that came later didn't invent a new idea. They built a funding mechanism and a filing system around one that was already operational. MKUltra ran from 1953. Most people know the name. Fewer people have actually gone into the subprojects and actually understand what was going on. Subproject 68 is the specific filing that focused on belief through repetition. This wasn't the torture. This wasn't the chemicals. This was repetition. How repeated stimulus introduced before a person has the cognitive architecture to question a source, encodes belief at a structural level. It quite literally redefines the dendrites in your brain. The document is in the CIA reading room. It's been there since declassification. What it describes isn't science fiction. It's an applied methodology. The question it never answers, and that the 1977 Senate hearings never pushed on hard enough, is at what scale was it applied, to whom, and starting when? The question was left open deliberately, and there were plenty of other experiments done on people that had been open for 10 to 20 years before we're even aware of it. Here's where the historical becomes current. In 2010, the British government formalized what they called the Behavioral Insights Team, internally known as the Nudge Unit. Its documented mandate: change population level behavior without legislation, without disclosure, without consent. The specific techniques: default enrollment, friction design, identity-based messaging, social norm signaling. These are not abstract. They're operational. They're applied to health decisions, financial behavior, political messaging, By 2015, the model had been exported. US, Australia, EU. It has a current budget, an active international footprint, peer-reviewed documentation. Your instinct that something that has been quietly steering your options, not just your choices, your option, isn't a feeling. It's on an org chart. So back to Gen X, the behavioral architecture we just walked through, the algorithmic content sequencing, the platform attention design, nudge infrastructure. None of it was deployed at civilian scale until the mid 2000s. By then, Gen X was already in their 30s and 40s. The formation window had closed. The installation had already happened, or in this case, it had not happened for them. What that means, their institutional skepticism, the thing that gets read as cynicism or contrarianism, didn't come from ideology. It came from forming a worldview before a system existed to pre-select what that worldview would be made of. In behavioral science, clean data is inconvenient for a system that needs the data to look a specific way. Gen X is clean data. And that's exactly why the framing around them leans so heavily on dismissal. They aren't tainted by influences. They're a control group in an experiment. The pattern you see consistently across behavioral research, across media framing, across the documented history of these programs, is that the primary defense mechanism isn't disproof. It's identity attack. You don't argue the evidence. You make questioning the evidence feel like a personality flaw. We covered the specific mechanism behind that in the last episode. What I want you to sit with right now is the timing. Bernays formalized the technique in 1928. Subproject 68 operationalized it in the 1950s. The nudge unit industrialized it in 2010. At every stage, the architecture got more precise, more scalable. The generation that formed before the most recent layer of that architecture, before the algorithmic version, is the one that keeps noticing the seams. Not because they're smarter, but because they didn't receive the software update that was designed to smooth them over. And a lot of us that did, starting to realize what happened. What behavioral science actually tells us, not the classified version, the peer-reviewed public version, is that belief systems formed in unmediated environments are significantly more resistant to social correction. Meaning, if you didn't get the early installation, you're harder to update later. That's not a character flaw. That's a structural outcome of when you were born and what was and wasn't place your worldview formed. The question worth sitting with isn't, are they right? The question is, why does the system need them to be wrong? What specifically becomes harder to maintain if the control group's data is taken seriously? That's where we go next. Subscribe. If you want to go deeper on any of the documents referenced, the Bernays text, the Subproject 68 filing, the nudge unit research, they're all linked in the description below. Primary sources, no paywalls, no gatekeeping.